Mayor de Blasio doesn't have a problem. He has a whole bunch of problems, a messy mix of tabloid accusations and official investigations into his administration and supporters. In the flurry of coverage, we've heard about deed restrictions, union funds and gun permits, carriage horses, liquor sales, and campaign contributions. What we know is that the Manhattan DA, the U.S. Attorney, and the city's own Department of Investigation are looking into the allegations, and that several NYPD officials have been stripped of their badges and guns. To talk about what's alleged and what's at stake, I'm pleased to welcome back to BK Live former New York City Comptroller John Liu. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you.
DNAinfo political reporter Jeff Mays. Thanks very much for being here, Jeff. And Bob Hennelly, a veteran investigative journalist. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thanks for having me.
So we should say at the outset, these are just allegations. Most of them we know through media reporting, no official charging document, and what is exactly alleged about particular individuals is still very fuzzy. But saying that, Jeff, let's talk about, this is a whole kind of chess set of different concerns about the mayor. One of them is this place called Rivington House. Right. What is that about?
Well, Rivington House was a nursing home for people with HIV and AIDS. It was owned by an organization called Village Care, which actually shut down, wanted to sell the building, made an attempt to get a deed restriction lifted because it was city property originally, and so they failed to do that. They ended up selling the building. The next seller was able to get this deed restriction lifted, which then opened up the property to sell at market rate for millions upon millions of dollars. So someone at the city lifted this deed restriction, which cost the city and even this nonprofit tens of millions of dollars, and now it's unsure of what that use is going to be, which the city really wanted it to be a nursing home, medical care center. So now people are looking into how that happened. One of the city's top lobbyists was involved in representing multiple parties in that sale, and so now there are some questions about exactly how this deed restriction was lifted in the first place.
And Bob, questions also about the NYPD. What are those about?
Well, what we do know is that there were two Brooklyn campaign donors who were close to the de Blasio administration who have been linked in the press to favors that were done for them by high-level members of the NYPD, like the inspector level. And that actually has more teeth to it, because in that case, the NYPD, which is a place that generally doesn't do these kinds of things lightly, has, as you said correctly, taken away people's guns and badges and, demoted these people awaiting an internal investigation. I think that the problem here is that what this does, the biggest problem for de Blasio, is denies him the ability to get his message out affirmatively. It's the lost opportunity cost where he's no longer in control of his own narrative.
Comptroller Liu, the other allegations, accusations, concerns revolve around campaign finance and donations of one form or another. Campaign for One New York, which is the mayor's nonprofit,
right,
fundraising around the 2014 state senate campaign.
Right.
What the mayor has said is that, or one of the main things the mayor has said is that this is business as usual. This is how things are done, and he's being singled out. Do you feel as though that's a legitimate defense on his part?
Well, let's take it back for a second. There are so many investigations going on right now, and they're all happening at the same time. So, somebody on the inside might question what's going on here. Is there some larger force at play that's coordinating all of these kinds of investigations going on at the same time? But to answer your question, Jarrett, the law is relatively clear in terms of what can and cannot be done. And based on my readings, if you read between the lines, between some of the sensationalist headlines that the media has generated in the last couple of weeks, it does seem that they did the right thing in 2014, and what they've done in terms of raising the money for the mayor's, legislative PAC, if you will, that's all similar to what's been done in the past. So de Blasio claims that he's the victim of selective enforcement. I wouldn't necessarily go that far, just because, look, at some point the law has to be enforced. But what I do think is that it's important for people, viewers, and the public in general to understand the facts before coming to conclusions or making judgments, especially when there's so much sensationalism going on with some of our media outlets who are just generating story after story after story, and yet I don't know what the facts are, and I don't think any of these journalists really know what the facts are, other than the people who are directly conducting these investigations. So the investigations need to, we need to let the investigations take their course and come up with facts as opposed to conjecture and innuendo.
Well, let's talk about the different investigations, because there are a few, as you mentioned, kind of swirling around. There's the U.S. Attorney, Preet Bharara. There's the FBI working with him. We know the Manhattan DA, also the City Comptroller, looking, I think, mainly at Rivington and the Department of Investigation. Bob, if you're the mayor, which of those investigations really concerns you? I think the answer is pretty obvious.
I think the U.S. Attorney. I think the problem that the DOI, Mark Peters, the Commissioner of DOI, the fact that he has had to step down from following up on the what the DOI was doing in terms of the mayor is problematic, and I think it raises the question of the wisdom of having someone who's such a close supporter and a key part of the campaign being named to DOI. And I think that this is instructive in the future. We really need to see that in the future when you appoint a DOI commissioner, I think it's best to have someone who's had absolutely no role to play in your campaign, because you can't see where it's going to go.
Jeff, you follow the mayor and City Hall daily, and one wonders, when you have a number of stories like this swirling around, what effect it has just on daily governance, and both your fellow guests have referred to that. Is it having an impact already, and what impact has that been?
Well, I think it's clear that the mayor now has to answer these questions at every press conference. Most of the press, when they go to his press conferences where he does off-topic questions, they are there to talk about these investigations. So he's rolling out lots of new things. Today he's in Albany arguing for mayoral control of the schools. But sure, the questions he's going to be asked are going to be about these investigations. So despite the fact that he recently unveiled his executive budget, despite the fact that crime is at an all-time record low, he's answering questions about these investigations. And this is not far out from when he's due to run for re-election. So this is a serious setback in terms of him pushing his agenda. But I just want to speak to the controller's point regarding the media. Look, the U.S. Attorney, the Manhattan District Attorney are investigating this. This is not the media's fault. And I think any sort of effort to kind of push it and blame it on the media is just a little tough to do at this point. There
is one framing, and we can address this, that I've seen in the media, and I want to hear your response to it, Comptroller, is a comparison between Bill de Blasio, kind of a more typical politician perhaps than our previous mayor, who as a billionaire, funded his own campaigns. The idea that this marks the return of the transactional mayor, and that this sort of stuff might be expected when you have a more sort of orthodox politician in office. Do you think that's fair?
I think some of that is fair, but if you look at, you mentioned two things, right? The state Senate campaign in 2014 on behalf of Democrats, and this nonprofit that he started to support his legislative agenda. Neither of those two concepts are new concepts. They've been done in the past, in the recent past. I think the previous mayor engaged in both of those kinds of transactions, if you will. So this is not something that's new, and in fact, according to the mayor's folks, this is totally in line not only with practice but with the law. So, I didn't necessarily say anything about DNA, Jeff.
No,
I wasn't. I know. I just want to say that look, there is a point where sometimes the media, which I revere as the Fourth Estate, the Fourth Estate is supposed to keep us all honest. But sometimes when you're generating headline after headline of sensationalist stories, and now stories about the mayor's staff, at best they're unflattering stories, at worst they're damning stories about these individuals and are going to affect their futures for the rest of their lives. At some point, you have to say, look, let's get back to the facts and let's get away from the sensationalism. And the question about, does this affect the administration and the mayor's ability to do their job on behalf of the people? I think it does have an impact. You guys may recall that I was the subject of a very long, intrusive investigation. Nobody ever accused me of doing anything wrong. But the fact is that you have to keep answering these questions when you're trying to talk about the work of your office or the progress that you're making or the initiatives that you're launching, and none of that gets heard because all they want is more and more and more about these investigations, which, an investigation doesn't mean that you did anything wrong.
Bob,
It just means that.
Yeah, I wanted to say.
Tell me one thing I want to
Sure.
address is let's pretend we're all going to hand in our press IDs or our retired politician IDs and pretend we work for de Blasio. What is the advice we give him on how to navigate that? The press, fair or unfair, the questions dominating his agenda. Is there a way out?
Yeah, I would say that what this has revealed is the fact that he makes, and we were talking about this earlier in the green room, that he's making calls to raise money. That's what staff is for, or political staff or operatives. You really, as the mayor of New York, I think it's unseemly to be making fundraising calls like that. That's the one thing Mayor Bloomberg didn't have to do. That's the ostensible difference. He had a vast fortune he could, lean on and put into motion. So de Blasio is a journeyman politician that way. He's self-made that way. And so I would also say that the argument he's been using, which is that this is the way politics is done, really, in some ways, that's not the argument you want to be making, because it puts you in a place. I mean, he got elected as someone who has a so-called progressive vision, and yet now he's looking like it's just, well, this is the way it's always been done. And people at this point, I just came from the picket line with Verizon, with the workers out there. There's a level of anger in the streets in this country and in the city right now. People are really feeling pushed up against it. There really wasn't a recovery. And so the degree to which the mayor is off message and not dealing with the things he was elected to deal with, he has to keep fighting to get that narrative back.
Something came up yesterday I thought was interesting. We saw Sheldon Silver being sentenced, and some of the questions for the mayor revolved around that. How people are supposed to look at these accusations about him in light of that. He drew a distinction while maintaining that he had done nothing wrong. Right. That there was a difference between Shelley Silver, who was found guilty of lining his own pockets, and his people who were being accused of perhaps bending the law, but in the name of a broader progressive agenda. Is that a distinction without a difference, or do you think that would matter?
A trial is a distinction that matters. A trial is what matters.
I mean, does that matter?
The mayor has been pushing that hard. He's made this ethical, moral distinction that, hey, I was arguing for universal pre-K. I'm fighting for affordable housing. I'm fighting for a minimum wage of $15. So he's making that distinction that this money was not used for his own use or his own issue, his own personal issues. However, I'm not sure the U.S. Attorney cares about that. They're looking at the law, whether the law was violated, whether it was broken, whether there was a purposeful effort to violate the law. And if you talk to the government groups, they talk about how, and I think Bob's point about making these calls, they talk about how that's just shouldn't be happening at this point, at this level of government, because it creates an environment where people sometimes feel obligated to give to the mayor and people with business before the city. So these calls, the issue of these calls is a very serious issue. So I think that is part of his problem.
As an optics issue or as a criminal justice matter, or both?
I think, obviously, the U.S. Attorney is looking to it. That's not for me to say whether it's a criminal justice, but the U.S. Attorney, the Manhattan District Attorney, is looking into these issues, and they feel it's something that needs to be examined. So it's
Comptroller, real quick final question. Let's say this ends up being nothing. Does a politician get their good name back? Is that possible in our system, or does the taint sort of stay there?
Well, once you're on the internet forever. And so to the extent that the Fourth Estate would be fair in in writing stories and publishing stories about the vindication, that would be good. But usually you get one paragraph that says, okay, nothing was found, end of story. No big headlines. They wind up on page 156. So it's not quite balanced in that sense. But at the end of the day, I do believe that people aren't stupid and they get the truth.
Well, let's hope it's a well-written paragraph at least. Thank you all for coming. We'll have you back on something a little more positive.